Today in class we started with an icebreaker that we made index cards where everyone used symbols to describe themselves, and then our classmates had to determine who the card belonged to. I thought that was a really interesting activity that I'd like to try. Next year I'll be teaching middle school for the first time in about 3 years, so it will be interesting to try that icebreaker with my middle school kids. We also talked about the Common Core standards that are meant to be used to create more conceptual understanding. I have noticed as a high school teacher, a lot of kids come into the class using tricks. They don't really understand what they're doing. They just know that there's this funny rhyme that they remember it, or they remember the procedure. Two that come to mind right away are order of operations, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and when they do proportions, they know how to solve them in their calculators. So I multiply these two things and divide by this value. They don't understand, though, that they're doing a cross product. So with the Common Core standards, the hope is that we'll be building more conceptual knowledge so that they actually understand what they're doing. We also talked about patterns. We talked about using manipulatives even at a very, very young age to learn how to recognize a pattern and then how to extend it, and then how that carries on up and through Algebra 1 with slope and all the way up into calculus. For the first question, what benefits did I gain from working with teachers across different grade levels? One of the biggest things, this is always a benefit, is discussing how other people approach teaching a certain concept. So for instance, we talked about teaching the arithmetic sequences. We talked about how we go about approaching that to explain it to our students. And also we talked about a lot of the common struggles that students have. And I thought that was good to hear. My students are always struggling with a particular thing, to hear that other teachers are also experiencing those struggles. For the second question, how did the experiences of working with teachers impact your learning of algebra and functions? When I'm explaining what I did to someone else, that helps me reflect on my knowledge, reflect on the procedure that I know. So that allows me to really gauge, do I really know what I'm talking about, or do I just have an idea? Also, when we were talking about proving the calendar math problem, I said, my approach is just start with it, go with it, write it down, and see if it actually leads anywhere. And I think it was beneficial just to talk about how we approach solving problems, to figure out what you know how to do and what you're just still trying to get the hang of. For the third question, how did the experiences of working with teachers impact your knowledge of how students learn? I think one of the biggest things was when we were doing the problem set, I immediately went to the arithmetic sequence formula. Okay, I teach it, I know it. It was my first instinct was to just plug in the numbers and figure out the values. Whereas Emily's first instinct was to actually draw a picture, to think about the scenario, to work it out in a different way. So I think that I realized I automatically go to algebra, to variables, to using a formula. My students are not going to do that because they're not accustomed to defining a variable. They're not aware of the formula. So I think that was beneficial to see that I need to take a step back and think not as an educated person with a college degree, but think about a student who has no experience with the formula yet. So I think that was just an eye-opener. The final one, what difficulties did you experience from working with teachers across different grade levels? one of the biggest difficulties, I don't know that it's a difficulty, but one of the biggest differences that we observed was just between the districts that we teach in. In our group table, we had one individual whose school district teaches differential equations, and then another individual whose school district does not allow Algebra 1, I think they said until the second half of 8th grade. So, right there are two fundamental differences in the school districts in our area. So, I will be teaching Algebra 1 to 8th graders next year. All 8th graders will take this course, whereas some other 8th graders are already into geometry. So, a lot of our discussion just talked about, are these kids actually ready? And that was just kind of the difficulty that we ran into, trying to figure out, all of these districts have different approaches to teaching math. Is there a better way to go about it? And I think that's it.